Hi, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. Welcome to this panel on community and local government responses. My name is Els de Graauw, and I'm a faculty member at Baruch College, where I teach in the political science department and also the School of International and Public Affairs. And I've long done research on the role of community organizations and local governments in the area of immigrant rights and immigrant integration. So I am very excited to be moderating this panel this afternoon. So this panel will explore the shifts in national immigration policy and practices under the Trump administration, what these shifts mean for local immigrant communities, local immigrant organizations, and also local government officials who want to advance immigrant rights and who want to resist the Trump administration's efforts to restrict immigration, to expand deportations, to thwart sanctuary policies, and to intensify border enforcement. We have a very distinguished panel this afternoon, and what I'd like to do is to briefly introduce each of our panelists, and then I'll kick off the discussion with a few questions that I'd like each of you to answer. There will be ample time for questions from the audience, so you guys have been very engaged so far, so keep it up. So in the middle, we have Anu Joshi. She is the Deputy Director of the New York State Immigrant Action Fund, which is a 501c4 organization that engages in political and electoral organizing to advocate for an immigrant rights agenda. Anu has worked for 5 years in the immigrant rights movement, including with the Center for New Community and the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Previously, Anu organized around issues related to access to education and also foreign policy issues. She was also a child protective services social worker. You have an interesting background there. She's a native Californian, and she earned her master's degree in social welfare from UC Berkeley. Go Bears. There's a couple of Bears in the room here. So let's see. Russ Upshaw is to my very, very left. He is here in Donna's stead. Russ has a long and very impressive resume, and here I will only highlight some of his accomplishments. So Russ has been a pastoral assistant at his church in Newark for 15 years. He was licensed as a minister in 2001, and he was ordained as a deacon in 1979. In 2016, he graduated from New York Theological Seminary with a master's degree in religious education. In 2006 and 2007, Ross was the co-chair of the New York State Supreme Court Anti-Bias Committee, where he worked to make the court system more accessible to all people, but particularly to minorities and immigrants. In 2015 and 2016, during his supervised ministry at Judson Memorial Church here in the city, Ross became involved with the New Sanctuary Coalition. And Ross recently started working at the coalition, where he organizes and conducts outreach to potential sanctuary congregations and new members of the coalition in New York City, but also in the surrounding metro area. And then to my immediate left is Monica Sibri. She is currently the New York Fellow with Ignite, which is a national nonpartisan organization that seeks to empower college-aged women to become the next generation of political leaders. Monica also serves as a close advisor to CUNY Dreamers, which is an undocumented student-led organization that she founded in 2013. And the goal of CUNY Dreamers, in case you're not familiar with them, is to help advance equal access to higher education and to build a network of support for the thousands of undocumented immigrants who study at CUNY. Now, I've been privileged to work with CUNY Dreamers this past year, and I know that they do fantastic work. Monica earned a bachelor's degree in American politics, policy, and advocacy from CUNY, She plans to go to graduate school, and I'm working to keep her within the CUNY system and to get her to apply to the MPA program at Baruch College. Well, let's give all the panelists a warm round of applause before we get started. So to get the conversation started, I'd like each of you to weigh in on several questions that I've prepared. So first of all, the immigration policies of the Trump administration present, as we know, a notable and drastic departure from the policies under Obama. And now immigrants from all backgrounds and immigration statuses feel under attack. Can you tell us what these changes in national politics and practices, what they have meant for each of you, and the work that you do on immigration issues and the work that you do with immigrant communities here in New York and the larger metro area? We'll start maybe with Ross.
Okay. The New Sanctuary Coalition provides an opportunity for immigrants to seek some kind of relief. We have a lot of immigrants who come to us and they're very fearful. Some of them have been detained already. They have been in detention centers. They've been separated from their families, and they are the breadwinners in many instances in their families, and that is gone. We invite them to come in to get some kind of help with filling out applications, try to see if we can get them some legal representation, to help them fill out the paperwork that's necessary, and we have some of the volunteers here today who are very involved in that with New Coalition. And so they are finding it comforting, and they are going back into their communities and telling their friends and families about the fact that we are providing this kind of service for them. We accompany them to their check-ins, we accompany them to their hearings. Just the fact that we are there, our presence makes a huge difference in how they're treated and how they are respected in the ICE environment. It makes a big difference knowing that someone is there, we have their backs, that we are comforting them, and that they are not alone. It's very important for them. And in the process of that, we have found out that there are many other ways that we can help. We're getting churches and community members and politicians to get involved with this issue of immigration deportation. We're dealing with, we have something called sanctuaryhood, which we're going around asking churches and the restaurants and dry cleaners and whatever, if they can become a sanctuary place. How we do that is we walk around, we inform them of the fact that they can become a sanctuary, safe space. And many of them are accepting that. Some of them have some trepidations, they have some concerns about it, and we try to allay those fears for them. And some of them have become, so that if there is an ICE raid in the area, they can go to these places. If they see this sign, they can go into that place and be safe. It may not be a sanctuary, physical sanctuary, but it's a sanctuary respite. In other words, it's a place that they can go until the danger is over from that's being displayed by ICE, if it's an ICE sweep or an ICE raid. And they are taught that if an ICE agent comes to their door, they have the right not to open it. And that they have the right to require or demand that a warrant, which is signed by a federal judge, is displayed before they would have to open up their doors. And that's a very important piece. Just recently, I saw on TV, MSNBC, that they had some ride-alongs, a journalist who was riding along with ICE agents. And one gentleman came out at 5 o'clock in the morning on his way to work, and ICE snatched him and took him to a detention center. And all he said was, I'm just leaving work. I'm just leaving my family. I'm just going to work. I'm trying to go make a living. But they took him. The same day, a few hours later, they went to another house, and they knocked on the door. They were going to try to detain someone, and all he did was came out with his rights card. He just opened up his door and showed his rights card and said, didn't say a word, just showed the rights card, and the ICE agents backed down. And so the journalist asked him, well, what happened here? And he said, he showed us a rights card. He says that we have to have a warrant signed by a federal judge. And so we have to obey the law. And we don't have it, which most times they don't have it. And so part of what we're doing is educating our immigrants and our undocumented to let them know they have rights and what they can do if there is an ICE sweep.
Thank you. Anu?
Sure. So I think I'm going to focus a little bit more on what's happening on the federal level, what has already happened and what we're kind of gearing up for, and talk a little bit about how that's impacted New York immigrant communities. So there's a couple of things on the horizon.
Maybe tell them a little bit about what the organization does.
Sure.
Yeah, so maybe to back up, I think that will help. That will be helpful.
Yeah, so I work for the New York State Immigrant Action Fund, which is the C4 sister organization to the New York Immigration Coalition. And so we work with member agencies in New York City and across the state who provide direct services, advocacy for immigrants and refugees living in New York. So we've been obviously following very closely what's happening on the national level and the impact that those policy changes will have here in the state of New York. So let me just talk about a couple of things that have happened. There's been so many, it feels like a fire hose, but a couple of weeks ago, Congress passed and Trump signed the budget for fiscal year 2017. So that's the budget year that we're currently in, to fund the federal government until September 30th. There were a couple of wins and a couple of losses in that federal budget that directly impact New York. So, on the really good side, there was no money included for a border wall on the southern border, which was a big win and obviously a big loss for this administration. And there was no new funding for additional ICE or CBP officers. On the negative side, they did allocate about $1.5 billion in additional funds to Department of Homeland Security above what they got last year. And that funding goes in part to shore up where there currently is fencing or wall at the southern border. So to do repairs, to build roads, to increase technology along the southern border to increase apprehensions. There was a $390 million increase for detention beds in the U.S. So right now, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, can detain about 34,000 people a night in immigration detention, and they increased that by about $390 million. It's unclear yet how many beds that will actually end up being, but they also increased the budget for transporting and removing people from the country, so actual active deportation, by about $350 million. So this is the beginning of what Trump called a deportation force during his campaign, and we're definitely going to see the immediate impacts of that here in New York, as they move to hire for positions that have already been filled, to fill these extra beds that now they have funding for, and to deport these people that now they have the additional funding to deport. They also allocated about $440 million for the immigration court system. So right now, as many of you know, there are huge backlogs when you're moving through the immigration justice system. So they allocated enough funding for about 10 new immigration judge court teams. And that can be good and bad depending on how those teams are utilized. If they send all 10 of those teams to the border and they use them for expedited removal to get people out of the country as fast as possible, that's obviously something we're going to be very concerned about. If they use them for asylum cases to help move people through the asylum system and get their cases heard more quickly and regularized, then that's something that we could support. They also included about $3 billion for refugee assistance, which is about the same as it was last year, but is $260 million more than the White House was asking for, which is good news, obviously. And they did not set a cap on the number of refugees that the United States can accept. Now, obviously, as we know, the Trump administration has tried multiple times at this point to pass to sign an unconstitutional executive order to put alleged temporary ban on refugee program in general, and then also once that temporary ban is lifted, to decrease the total number of refugees that the U.S. admits from 100,000 right now under the Obama administration to 50,000. The impact that this could have on New York especially is obviously in upstate New York, we have a lot of refugees that have resettled in our state, and we have refugee resettlement agencies who help refugees who are new to the United States and those who have been here for a few years get settled into their new homes. Those refugee resettlement agencies rely on this federal funding in order to provide those services, to make sure that families are successful, families that are fleeing persecution and violence, once they come here, are successful in integrating into local culture. So if that program is suspended, then all of that funding is suspended as well. So even refugees that are currently here, who are supported by those agencies, will see a sharp drop in services that are available to them. Obviously, the other thing that we've seen is, as a part of that refugee ban, was the attempt to ban all travelers from 7 and then 6 predominantly Muslim countries. As many of you may know, that's actually making its way through the federal court system right now. There was a hearing on Monday, and then there's another hearing this coming Monday in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And we saw the direct impact of that here in New York at JFK. We were the first people on the ground mobilizing at JFK. The NYIC had hundreds of volunteer attorneys from across the city who mobilized to JFK to make sure that everyone who was detained and held had representation and was able to leave JFK. And we still don't know what's going to happen with that. The Ninth Circuit and the Fourth Circuit in Virginia have put a temporary stay on the order from being implemented across the country. And within the next few weeks, we're expecting to hear from one or both of the courts their final ruling. It almost certainly will be appealed to the Supreme Court. And as you know, the nuclear option was engaged, and so we have Trump-appointed Supreme Court nominee now on the court, on a court that's gone 5-4 in many close decisions. So it'll be a case to watch, and could determine our standing in the world and the refugee program as we move forward. So that will obviously impact New York communities really greatly. The last thing that I want to talk about, and then if there are questions, there's obviously many more things, is DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And as a part of that was an Interior Enforcement Executive Order that was signed a couple of weeks after the inauguration. And I want to talk about these as a package. The Interior Enforcement Executive Order did not get as much publicity because of the grotesque and unconstitutional nature of the Muslim and refugee ban. But in many ways, the Interior Enforcement Executive Order we've really seen the reverberations of that here in New York and across the country. Basically, what that order did was make anyone living in the country currently without papers, undocumented, a priority for removal. So under Obama, we saw a skyrocketing number of deportations. At one point under Obama, there were 400,000 people a year being deported. But that being said, and there was a lot of problems with the deportation machine that was happening under President Obama, there were a set of priorities that were outlined in a set of memos under prosecutorial discretion. And a number of factors were taken into account when deciding whether or not someone should become the subject of an ICE removal, including length of stay in the United States, whether or not they had U.S. citizen children or U.S. citizens' parents that they were supporting, and any number of mitigating factors. And basically what this Interior Enforcement Executive Order did was get rid of all of those priorities and say literally, if you are living in this country without papers, if you're undocumented, that you are now a priority for removal. And so in the 4 months since that executive order was signed, we haven't necessarily seen a huge uptick in the number of people deported or detained as they're waiting for additional funding to come in. But what we have seen is kind of a haphazard ICE raids where they're going in ostensibly after, a certain individual, and then any collaterals that are there who they're encountering, they're also taking in, because now everyone's a priority for removal, and so there's no need to prioritize resources. And so what we've really seen is how much fear that's sown into immigrant communities. And I see a lot of people shaking their heads, experiencing this firsthand, I'm sure. So even though ICE might not still have the resources available to go out and knock on every door and detain and deport every undocumented person, the fact that now you have no idea, communities have no idea who's a priority for removal, is making it so that parents are afraid to send their children to school. They're afraid to go to the doctor if they're sick. They're afraid to go to court if they have been the victim of domestic violence, or if for any number of other reasons. And that's really bad for all of us. It's bad for undocumented communities, but it's really bad for everyone. And I'll tie that into DACA in the same way that although thankfully the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, still exists and has not been terminated, even though there was an executive order that was leaked, the uncertainty of not knowing if that program will continue or not is fear-inspiring in communities. Whether or not you should spend the $500 to renew your DACA application, whether or not you should apply for the first time if you're just meeting the eligibility requirements. So all of that to say that even without additional funding, even without necessarily detaining or deporting more people yet, this administration has very effectively advanced their anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-foreigner campaign. And so that's something that we are fighting on a daily basis. And so I'll just end on a positive note that we have seen such amazing support from the community. So many of you might have been there, but the day after the Muslim refugee ban came out, we had 30,000 people out in Battery Park protesting and saying that New York City will resist. This past Monday, a week ago for May Day, we had thousands of people out in the streets across the state, actually, in actions across the state, demanding justice for immigrant and refugee communities in New York and across the country. And we've been winning in the courts. So even on things like the Department of Justice trying to withhold funding from cities that refuse to cooperate with immigration enforcement agencies, refuse to unconstitutionally detain people for the express purpose of being deported. Their funds cannot be withheld. A federal judge ruled that it is illegal for the federal government to withhold funds from them. So we're winning in court, we're winning on the street, we're winning in public opinion. So we just have to keep it up, even as we face a whole new set of dangers over the next few years.
Thank you. Monica.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to first start by saying thank you for staying. I know that it's been a long day, but also to start with a short story about how I'm even here. 3 years ago, I was sitting in the back of this room for my first ever information session about immigrant services that the Murphy Institute was having. And I refused to sit in the front, which is usually what my parents will tell me all the time, right, as I go to school, because I didn't speak English. And because I didn't want to sit in the front and someone asked me a question and I will have to turn around and they will think that I was rude or that I didn't want to talk to them. But in fact, it was because I didn't understand what they were telling me. And instead of having that very lengthy conversation where I kept talking in Spanish or trying to figure out something to say, I would just sit in the back where nobody will ask me questions. So I'm really happy to be here in the front now, talking about these things, and that's also for whoever gets to watch this video or listen. Things happen if you really work hard. And so she asked the question of, what is the immigration policies at the national level really causing at the local level, at the state level. And so I am an undocumented immigrant, and I am the first one in my family with a college degree, with a bachelor's degree. I am also the first one to, continue doing my work outside of the immigrant movement, but is still getting involved. And so I think that in the personal level, the immigration policies at the national level have absolutely created fear. I no longer attend all these panels and conferences in other states to talk about my immigration story because I'm not sure who is in the room. So I'm telling you who I am right now because I know that I'm in New York City and I will not be expecting to be deported in the elevator or as soon as I get out of this room. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been moments in my past couple months in my work that I haven't felt afraid. I actually did a recent video with a national outcast, and I didn't know who was in the room. And so I was surprised that when I walked into that interview, it was supposed to be just a conversation at a bar about the 100 days of President Trump. I walked into the room and I found myself in front of the chairperson from the Republican Party from the Bronx. And so I wanted to cry. I was just like, oh my God. But then I realized that they don't know who I am, right? We walk into a room of nobody knew who we were. We wanted to talk about what we are experiencing as individuals under the Trump administration. And so I didn't talk to them about my immigration story. I talked to them about my work, what I do, and they were really excited about my work because I work with a national organization now that trains young women to run for office. It's called Ignite. Go watch them, follow them on Instagram, Twitter. That's my plug in there. And so I told them, I don't believe in the two-party system. I believe that you work for the issues, that you work for things that are helping people move forward. And so I work with young women who consider themselves Republicans, and I train them in how they will run for office and how would they get elected. And so I explained to the Bronx chairperson and the other young woman who was a real estate worker, and she wanted to talk about, she was also part of the Women's Republican Party from the city. So I was in front of two powerful Republican people that had strong views about immigration. But I explained to them about my work. I explained how I would love to connect with them in the future, to send them the young women that I work with. So they were really impressed. It came down to our conversation. You can watch the video. I don't know if it's streaming is still online, but I know there's the promo video. But if you watch the responses when we went through this lengthy conversation about how we felt, and then there was this question of, how do you see yourself in your future? And I said, I unfortunately don't have that opportunity. I can't look at the future and say, I'm planning in 2 more months, 3 more months of what I'm going to do. I'm living literally every day as it comes, trying to protect not only myself, but my family and the people that I work with. And so when I told them that I was undocumented, their response, it was just like they froze. They didn't know what to say. One of the women said, okay, and just keep going with another conversation because they couldn't. But full disclosure, they were very respectful. There were people that work in their field as well. There were follow-up conversations on how they felt and their experience. But I think that the message that we get when we share our stories in places where they're not used to meeting us outside of our immigration story is, well, you're the only case, or you're the exception, or, oh my God, I've never met someone like you. And that's when we get that opportunity to bring them into what this issue is about. And it's about community, it's about all of us. It's not about just about undocumented immigrants or immigration. So that's at the personal level. Now, in my work, I got very lucky right after graduation to start working for what I wanted. So my mission has always been that as an undocumented immigrant, you're not limited to just working for immigration issues. You're not limited just to become an organizer or an activist. You continue to follow your path, your academic aspirations, your professional aspirations, but keeping yourself aware of the issues that are happening around immigration, because whether you like it or not, that will affect you. And so I graduated to continue doing my work in politics. I love the fact that, we care about all these issues, but at the end of the day, if we're not at the table, these conversations, these laws are not going to happen. And so my goal has been to continue to get more progressive, especially women of color, into politics, to get them actively participating, not just getting elected as state senators or assembly or Congress, but community boards. That's where we are doing most of the work that comes down to our local experiences. And so my work around that in terms of the immigration national discourse has really not affected that much, because I try to take that away from the young women that I work with and the undocumented students that I work with. I try to make sure that they understand that in order for them to not be deported, or in order for them to have resources, they need to be connected to their community. And so I'm aware that that's not the same experience for everybody. So that's only in New York City. That's not across the state. That is not happening in upstate New York. And so actually moving forward, my next steps in terms of immigration, which is, where I'm going to continue to work really hard, is I'm relaunching New York Dreamers. It's something that I founded in 2015 after I got engaged in a hunger strike. Google it, long story. But, there's like that point where politics matters and you got to be at the table having these conversations, but where you're suddenly taken out of the table. Like, I didn't know that I was capable of doing a hunger strike. And I did it. And so those next steps and those experiences have allowed me to continue to build on community with undocumented students. But just to take it a little bit outside of my experience with my political work and the work that I'm doing, just with undocumented student experience. I share a little about my story, being afraid of what am I going to do now that I just told the chairperson of the Bronx Republican Party that I'm undocumented. It's also my experiences with undocumented students that I talk to every day. And it's really empowering and sad to hear their stories, because a lot of us have little brothers or family members who are U.S. citizens at a young underage, and the paperwork that they have been going through with their parents, the fact that the parents cannot move forward and go and do the paperwork to pretty much give up the children to someone else in the family who's a U.S. citizen. So undocumented students like myself have been going to court to drop those documents for our parents, getting through the lawyers for those documents that our parents cannot even see, and build up the character to go and say, I'm willing to give up my kid if I'm to be deported to someone else to take care for it. And so that's one of the things. And in regards to undocumented students who have deferred action for childhood arrivals, DACA, it has really been a long process of, you can't really tell them, yeah, go apply for DACA because you need it. You need a Social Security to work. But then what if they're to be deported because they did that? And so what we do is we just balance what they currently have in front of them and say, these are your opportunities. These are the consequences. It's your decision. It's your choice. We know currently that, at least at the City University of New York, the undocumented population continues to grow because of national scholarships that are allowing them to go into school, as well as local.
How many undocumented students are there at CUNY?
So the last data that we got, and that's tricky, right? We want the data. We want to know how many of them are in CUNY, how many of them are actually going to school. But then we get the data. President Trump could come easily and say, you guys have the data, give it to us. And so we haven't asked for the data, but the last resort that we got from 2013-14 said that we have more than 6,000 undocumented students. We also, and I was very lucky while I was an undergraduate student to put pressure, and that's something that I didn't learn from anybody. I had to Google this, I had to attend panels like this, just sort of like find my way in. And I was the only one ever in CUNY that requested them to give me the amount of students that are graduating from CUNY that are undocumented. How many of them are graduating on time? How many of them are coming from different communities, or the communities that are really here needing the most assistance from the City University of New York? And that's how we found out that we had 800 undocumented students graduating from CUNY. Most of them graduated with their bachelor's in 4 to 6 years. So it's not like they had every single opportunity, but we know that they're graduating. So one scholarship, one stipend is allowing them to continue with their education. That's in regards to that. We also know that at SUNY and CUNY, they're putting extra efforts to bring more resources for undocumented students. As you know, CUNY, I don't think I have to talk much about them. They're very progressive in terms of like their office from CUNY Citizenship Now, their lawyers, free legal assistance to all of them. SUNY, however, has been working very, very slow, and my understanding with working with them is that they don't have the same amount of students organizing in their institutions. And so how can they come forward when they don't really know the needs of their students? But I can't go and tell a SUNY student, you need to go out there, you need to tell them what you need, when we know that there will be consequences, especially upstate New York. Which is why the SUNY system has created a website. So if you have students who are SUNY, you can go on their main website, SUNY Central, and you will see that there is a page now created for undocumented students at SUNY to receive resources, and they're putting pretty much anything that comes their way. So if you're interested in sending them something, send them, there's an email, they'll be putting it up on their website so that more students can get access to that. The other thing is, as allies, as supporters who are not part of this movement, you coming to talk to undocumented students at this point is a very tricky situation, because there's language that could be misunderstood because of how we're feeling, because of our experiences. So that's something that we're currently working around and trying to find a better way to have those conversations, because there was a student rally a couple of months ago here in New York City that got a lot of attention. And I was plugged in with a couple of other students. And there's a student who was organizing it, she just wanted everybody to go out there and be part of it. But we couldn't ask undocumented students to go stand in front of these offices from ICE and yell saying, we're here to protect ourselves. Like, they could come out and deport us. And that's, part of these conversations where when you're planning a rally, when you're planning an event, right now under this administration, there is this conversation that it's not happening as it used to be. Before, we will get those emails, we will get all of this information about rallies, and we will just go because we knew nothing could happen to us. Now, nobody knows. All these organizers who were anti-immigrants are still out there. I mean, there's this old man who hasn't moved, and he's always there with his signs. Those that have been to rallies will know who he is. Mm-hmm. I've got so many tweets, messages. I went to, my home campus was in the College of Staten Island, so I was in Staten Island. And I continued to get messages that, they're telling me that they're sending someone to my house, that ICE will deport me anytime. Those are emails, text messages, because I went to school with people who I thought were my friends, and now they're not. So that's what's happening right now for us as undocumented students.
Thank you. So I'm a political scientist, and in my work I focus on cities, and I know that cities have long been very important when it comes to defending and promoting immigrant integration, immigrant rights, back in the past, but also today, but particularly in this day and time with immigration enforcement being at the top of the federal agenda, cities and states have taken on even more, more of an importance in these questions of promoting and defending immigrant rights. So you've each talked about the work that you do, the experiences that you have, the people that you work with, and I'd love to hear what you see as the most important issues, maybe one or two. I know it's hard because there's so many things that need to be addressed, but one or two issues that you think need to be addressed locally, so say maybe in New York City or at the state level, that would help to make our city and the state a safer place for immigrants to live and thrive. And maybe we'll start with Anu and then Ross.
Sure. Okay, I can highlight two.
Okay.
Try to keep it
Because you
brief.
focused a lot on the federal stuff, so I'd love to hear your kind of local perspective on these things.
Yeah, so we are actually getting ready to launch a campaign that will focus on cities and localities outside of New York City, and encouraging them to become, to limit their cooperation with immigration enforcement officials, so both Border Patrol and ICE. And so one example I'll give for that is, for example, Westchester County is currently in the process of debating a bill that would limit cooperation between all county agencies and immigration enforcement. The other example of that would be, some of you might have heard about this, but in some cities up north, there's a lot of cooperation, maybe not with ICE, although to some degree, but with Border Patrol. So in a little town called Geneseo a couple of weeks ago, a family was pulled over by Geneseo police, who immediately called Border Patrol. And then a mom and her 12-year-old brother were taken into detention overnight, and leaving behind multiple children, handcuffed, taken away in front of their kids. And that's because the Geneseo police decided to call Border Patrol, even though the stop had nothing to do with immigration. So right there are policies that cities and counties can decide to put into place to help protect their immigrant communities. On the New York City side, one thing I'll say is, we are obviously a leader in terms of trying to protect immigrant communities. And one really good example of that is that the district attorney, the acting district attorney in Brooklyn, has really gone above and beyond to institute policies to make sure that the kind of broken windows policing that happens in New York doesn't have even more negative consequences, immigration consequences for immigrant New Yorkers. So he has an office and immigration attorneys on staff who look at the immigration implications of low-level or broken windows policing type offenses in order to ensure that New Yorkers aren't being penalized on multiple fronts. So that's one policy that we'd love to see across all boroughs and across the state, DAs taking a more proactive approach to making sure that the negative immigration consequences are really taken into account.
Thank you. Ross?
Yes. We're asking city officials and politicians to help accompany us when we do check-ins with ICE and go to hearings. The fact that they are there when they do come brings attention and puts the public on notice that we do have politicians who are against these immigration laws and are in the process of trying to bring about change. The main thing we want to do is bring about education. We want to educate our citizenry about what's going on. There is I don't know whether a lot of people know about Core Civic, and Core Civic is the formerly known as the Corrections Corporation of America, which has 70,000 beds across the United States that are designated ICE beds. And they are in detention centers in many of the communities across the country, and it's a privately owned system, jail system, and they are paid by our taxpayers. Our tax dollars go to support Core Civic, and so when people are made aware of this, they become alarmed that their taxpayer dollars are being used for this purpose. So part of this thing is to educate people, to let them know that you do have a voice. You can talk to your politicians. You can talk to your local representatives to say, why do we have, for instance, I live in Bergen County, New Jersey. We have a detention center that's set aside for ICE. In fact, many of our immigrants who are picked up and detained into detention centers here in New York are sent to Bergen County, New Jersey, to the ICE detention center there, and they're transported back and forth. Many of our residents in Hackensack have no idea that that's even going on, and that their tax dollars are going to support this. So part of that is what we do. Going into church, our church leaders make a significant impact on this movement. They're respected in most instances in their communities. They do great work, and so when we get our faith-based leaders to come and support this, their congregation usually follows and helps support them. And so it's a great way of bringing them into the fold through their pastors and their teachers. And in that vein, we have a video from Reverend Donna Schapper that we may want to play if we can.
I probably would want someone to show me how to get this to work. Yeah, you got it? Okay.
So what we're doing is we're educating our congregations about this issue. When I go around to speak to congregations, many of them have no idea that this is what's going on. They're so out of the loop with this, and then we're bringing them into it, and they are outraged, and they are having rallies and supporting this effort as we go forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, we got it. It's just click the mouse? Is that? Okay.
Today, I cannot stay away from the karma of forgiveness because ICE has started the raids. And how could you stay away from the subject of forgiveness today? When our government is instituting a policy of not non-forgiveness, but anti-forgiveness. Anti-forgiveness, you've got a prior, you serve time for it, we're deporting you for that. That is anti-forgiveness. Religious people of all kinds hold forgiveness as central to our faith. You could therefore argue that the state is attacking the principle of forgiveness as well as the forgiven in its sweeps. Therefore, our nation is in danger, great danger, of losing a fundamental principle, that of forgiveness and fairness, and I declare the religious right of refusal. The idea that we would make believe we weren't a sanctuary because the state said we couldn't be a sanctuary goes to the heart of our business. We are a sanctuary. We open these doors and create safe spaces for all people. The entire operation of ICE is built on a false premise that it is making us safe from dangerous immigrants. It is a big lie. In fact, strict immigration enforcement and the banning of refugees are both making us more endangered, not more safe. In the Refugee Ban, we are confirming the terrorist narrative, not challenging it. So forgiveness itself is being deported. And that is the biggest lie of all, that America is somehow so destined to be first that we cannot protect people who aren't among the first. That is so dangerous to the entire nation. Sanctuary, or the primary mission of the church, is threatened. Forgiveness is threatened, and we exist to forgive and to give sanctuary. If we don't forgive others, God will not be able to forgive us. She will probably try, but we probably won't be able to receive it. Our salvation is on the line. We need to vet ourselves before we vet anybody else. There is only one executive order, at least for me, and that is what our parent who is in heaven said. Hallowed is that name, not the United States of America.
And this is what we do when we go to houses of worship, faith-based institutions. We present that message to them, and it gets them involved. Often in the congregations, in these places, are politicians. It's hard to get politicians very often to listen. They like to do a lot of talking, and so they're a captive audience there. And it makes a difference as to how they respond to this call and to this plea for them to get involved. And it's working. It's working. When politicians and faith-based leaders work together, it brings about a great change.
Wow. Thank you. Sorry, scribbling notes here. I was wondering, Monica, if you could maybe talk a little bit about what you see are kind of the policy changes, the needs for students and dreamers, right?
Totally.
Yes.
And do not tell me that we cannot see the New York State Dream Act happen right now because of politicians or politics happening. We create those barriers. And so I am going full on this, and mark my words, because I do not commit to something and then I don't follow through with it. Even if that brings me down, even if that will cause my deportation. I am livid, and tired of people who continue to underestimate undocumented students and their movement. I think at the state level, we need the New York State Dream Act, which will give undocumented immigrants, the students who are in school, to get access to a tuition system program so they can go to school. Don't tell me that going to school, it's not something that we need. Don't tell me that without DACA, without the DREAM Act at the state level, we will have the same opportunities to be organizing and doing advocacy work. I only made it through school because the mayor's office allowed for interns when I was a freshman to get a monthly Metro card without questioning my immigration status. I lived through my undergraduate career for 4 years, made it through school because I had a monthly Metro card. That's all I needed for me to mobilize and do my work, and a computer. I used the free internet from Starbucks, so that was fine. They didn't yell at me, that was a good thing. And so that at the state level, we need that, and I think it's possible. It's something that we should do. Elections is coming up, undocumented students have no limitations in the work that we can do when we get involved in their candidates and their campaigns. So if we need to get them out of office, we will. We have the power. We can. It only takes 1 hour, 2 hours of our time to go give out flyers, to give out information. I mean, I think right now at this point at the state level for bringing the New York State Dream Act to the floor, it's really just holding our own elected officials accountable. We have all these progressive elected officials, bringing Governor Cuomo, bringing all of them to speak to us in our districts, to start, talking about what they want, but then there is no conversation about whether they're following through with that or not. So they're inviting us to these events. They're using us to, take pictures with them, having these conversations of how they're going to defend our rights and all of this, but then we're not seeing the results of it. And so 3 years ago, I was there when Governor Cuomo was very openly talking about how he was going to get the DREAM Act passed within the next 4 years. Well, we're about to hit the clock, and so I want to see that happen. Also, I think it's a lot of that coming from us too. What are we doing to hold them accountable? Why are we saying that we are a sanctuary city when we're not, or a sanctuary state when we're not? We're seeing people getting deported. We're seeing how our police is, working with them. She just shared the case from upstate. So I think for us really comes down to not being afraid anymore. at the end of the day, I am technically part of the target right now. I could be deported. So if I am going to be deported, I'm going to be deported doing my work and making sure that they are following through with what they're saying. That's at the state level. That's my only piece of legislation that I think for students, especially if we want to get them through college, we need to do it. At the city level, all police, don't come and tell me.
I'm going to limit you to one.
I know. No, obviously one. That we're so progressive. No, we're not. There is a scholarship that the city council has that could be open to undocumented students, but they don't talk about this. They just like, oh, we're limited because of this law. Well, then let's get that law passed. If we all so progressive at the city council, let that get done. There were several undocumented students that I worked on that campaign for the scholarship. It used to be called the Pitiable Loan Scholarship. When I worked on that, it was called the AAA Scholarship. Now it's just, we call it the City Council Scholarship. But that scholarship was previously open to undocumented students. Undocumented students who are now, thanks to DACA, working as nurses in different hospitals because they got that opportunity to go through their undergraduate experience with everything paid. But then AAA happened, the same scholarship, worked on it, and I was very happy. I got every student to go and support, and then I learned that it wasn't open to undocumented students. No one told me that. I had to read through all their documents to find out that that was happening, and then hear experiences of the students. There's a student at Hunter right now who's actually in the leadership of CUNY Dreamers, who happened to, be excited of that scholarship, and then it was suddenly taken away because they found out that she was undocumented. And so I think that that's what we should be doing. Really talking to our city council and saying, you have this scholarship. Let's open it up for undocumented students. That's how we will help them get through college. And so they can also organize.
Thank you. I have one more question, but I'm going to ask you to be brief so we can turn it over to the audience. But this new immigration reality, I think, forces all of us to think more about how we can challenge ourselves to do better and to work smarter, and how we can work better together to protect and serve all immigrants. And we have a variety of perspectives here from the faith community, the advocacy community, and you have multiple hats, but say the student organization, right? So in your view, how can community organizations collaborate better with each other? And how can they work better with city officials? And how can city officials work better with all of you to advance immigrant protections? And maybe we'll start with Ross. I'm going to ask you to be brief so we can turn it over to the audience.
One thing that New Sanctuary promotes is getting an ID card. The municipal ID card helps because we're asking that everybody in the city of New York obtain one, so that if you're stopped or you're asked for your ID, that you can show your municipal ID card, because many of our immigrants and undocumented have these municipal ID cards to show as that if they're asked stopped or whatever. But if we all show it, instead of if you're stopped or asked for your ID, if everyone shows the same thing, shows a municipal ID card, then it becomes common. It's not just relegated to the undocumented. So that's one way. It's a collaboration that we can all work together because it becomes a common thing that we're showing our municipal ID card for ID instead of our driver's license or whatever ID we usually show. So that's one way of
yeah, and just for the record, New York City is already doing much better than other cities that have similar programs. But we can do even better, you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Yes. Anu.
Sure. One thing that we've done at the NYC is we've started a group, Defend Our New York, that pulls in non-traditional partners who have really stepped up to the plate in a lot of different ways. So groups like Planned Parenthood or the Sierra Club or Hispanic Federation who are looking to figure out how they can support immigrant communities here in New York City and across the state. And so working with them and labor to be able to react in rapid response moments, but then also figure out longer term strategies to support communities.
Thank you. And Monica?
For us, it's really about building coalitions. I don't have money. I don't have resources besides me reaching out to people. So everything that, NYC is doing, all these other big organizations are doing, and I pride myself because I learn a lot of how to bring other people involved in the movement, because when I started working, my direct connection wasn't the NYC or the immigrant movement. I reached out to non-traditional partners, people that worked in the health department, people that work in Planned Parenthood, and got them involved so they can be part of our network of support. But for us, I think moving forward, and especially for me, will be to start looking at how we can get all those non-traditional partners to be there when there is an incident or a possible deportation of someone. And also someone just to talk to. What we've seen recently is, and unstoppably, our phones are ringing a lot because we have undocumented students coming forward wanting to talk about their experiences. And what do you tell them when you're also going through the same situation? So we need people that are already adults. Of course, we know some adults don't behave like adults, but we're looking for those that are willing to have that really just listen to us and have that conversation of letting us say things without we fearing that you will then say it to someone else. So I think that for us, it's just reaching out to those non-traditional partners to just start having those one-on-one conversations or learning how to be able to understand now what we're going through, knowing that there's language that sometimes before when we used to say it, it was sort of normal and, the undocumented students used to understand it, but now it has become something that touches and hurts a lot because we know that that's what a lot of people are feeling. That's why we have the president that we currently have. So that's where we're going more now.
Thank you. I now want to ask the audience to raise a question, comment, feedback, and if you do so, please introduce yourself. And if there's a particular person that you're directing the question to, let us know. And we'll start from the back. We'll start with Ruth. No. Is there a mic?
I'll just yell. I have a very quick question for Ross about the NYC ID program. I have one of those IDs, which I got, not only for the discounts, but outline. But now that Trump is the president, isn't there a danger that the records that the city holds of those names and addresses will somehow be obtained by ICE? And what, if anything, is going on to prevent that?
That question I really can't answer. I'm not sure what they're doing with that. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, so New York City, when the program went into effect, they did put in fail-safes to prevent that from happening, from having to share. They only keep 2 years' worth of data, and then it's erased regardless. And there was a lawsuit that was filed by 2 members of the state legislature to force them to keep the data past that they were preparing to erase. And they actually lost that lawsuit. So the city is now able to move forward and erase all of that data.
Good.
And I'm just going to add a little bit of that. I was in Georgia about a month ago, and I showed my municipal ID, and I was told that, oh, well, so that you're an illegal, right? That's why you have this ID. And I froze, because that was the first time I was using my municipal ID outside of New York City. So just to add from our perspective, we have encouraged every student that we work with and their parents to apply for the municipal ID because you need an identification. But we know that there are risks, and people, especially those that are not very friendly of the ID, will say things like that. And so preparing our students and our families to also be able to react to those kind of conversations is something that we're engaged in. That's why we have info sessions in the summer or info sessions during the week as well.
And it goes back to what Ross mentioned earlier, right? Everybody should get the card, so it becomes less of a scarlet letter or
Exactly.
a bullseye, right, for the
Exactly.
undocumented
Exactly.
community.
Right.
So
Yep.
the gentleman with the hand up and the pen in his hand.
Hi, Bruce Rosen.
Oh, yes, Bruce, hi, yes.
Mostly to Monica, but anybody can answer this. One of the things that I've been active in is as a fractivist. And there was one year, several years ago, on a lobbying and rallying day in Albany, that the fractivists, the dreamers, the educational equity, and the women's rights groups got together on the $1 Million Staircase in the Capitol because all of our issues were being blocked by money that was paid. Now, fractivists got a sort of win in the state because the governor blocked any new drilling in the state, but have had to continue to block every single pipeline, compressor, and storage facility since then coming from out of the state. I'm wondering, have you seen any particular deep-pocketed groups that have been around, that are creating problems, and have joined forces because this wondrous thing called the Donald has come in, and now that they can ride on that, the same way that, you know, other egregious billionaires have been riding on this train?
Sure. I think that she just mentioned two people, right? I've seen more people than organizations or an organized from that's coming, that's pretty much telling us we can do this kind of things. No, I've seen it more from elected officials who have been openly about their anti-immigrant agendas, and I very openly say who they are because I hope that if you're a constituent and you don't agree with them, you get them out of office. Nicole Malliotakis, Flanagan, and so from our perspective, we really were now trying to focus in building these other non-traditional pipelines for undocumented students to be able to have that rapid response to connect with someone in the case of their deportation or an incident that may affect them or cost them a possible deportation. So we are, and you know, we really work really hard on all this, but we don't have those resources. We just don't. And so our next step is that as a recent college graduate, understanding and going through all these 4 years about, you know, even just working in a group, building those networks has been a process. And so now taking all of that outside of that student environment, it's what I think will help us find the resources to take the next step and to actually pressure our state legislature and the city council to bring resources. So if you do find them, though, send us an email so we can be connected and be able to follow up properly in instances like that. But for the moment, we haven't seen an organized front more than just the elected officials that I mentioned.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? No? Yes, right here. The mic is coming.
Hello, Monique. Monica, if you are partaking with the hunger strike in front of Senator Schumer's office, was that the one you were at?
No, I was
Because
not.
that's the one I was there every evening.
You're starving together.
Thank you.
Anyway, I'm Vivian McLean. I'm an advocate for immigrants, and I work from NYIC. Jackie will tell you I'm at everything that they have. I was at the Valentine. I know I was at May 1st. And I just want to tell you that something you said about the assistant district attorney, Mr. Gonzalez. I was at a forum 2 weeks ago at a church in Brooklyn, and I'd gotten up and asked a question about my fear for what's going to happen to misdemeanors. And this is because, again, like Monica and the Dreamers, I've been doing this from 2010, mostly with young people. So I'd gotten up and asked them if what I'd heard, where the plan was to make the misdemeanors, like jumping the turnstile, urinating in public, standing with liquor or whatever, on, you know, not in that container on the sidewalk. And he was out of the office. He was downstairs having breakfast. Then when he came up, we spoke together, and he says, he's trying, he wants it not, I'd asked him, I heard it was going to be something like a desk ticket instead of a misdemeanor. And he said he was even trying to get it destined even to a desk appearance. So if there are any attorneys here or people who can maybe put some pressure on the city council, he tells me it has to come from them to change that law. So at least if you can protect that. Young people are like, you know, follow the leader. The boys jump over the turnstile, but their friends were born here. Or so, and it's the kids with the green cards or the kids who are undocumented will be at risk. So this is where, again, I guess will be my new position to try to see if we can at least see if they can follow up and at least protect that the people who are prone to misdemeanors, but under Trump now, under Obama, they would have been safe, but at least under Trump, who knows?
Who knows, yeah.
Anybody want to comment, respond? No? Okay.
Yeah.
The hunger strike was in front of City Council.
Shannon over there, and then we'll go to May. We'll do Shannon over there. Over there. You had your hand up. Right behind the camera.
Shannon Gleason here from Cornell. And I had a question specifically for Anu, but also for Monica, thinking about statewide coalitions. I'm upstate, and we live in a different country up there. We're in a little island in Ithaca and in Tompkins County. But I wondered if you could say a little bit about resource allocation, and so how you think about the upstate, downstate dynamics, and how that influences the work you're doing, both in terms of student organizing in the SUNY system, but then also in terms of kind of statewide allocation for some of the resources that you were talking about, Anu.
You want to go? Sure. So this is obviously something that we struggle with, figuring out how to allocate resources meaningfully upstate and really have a meaningful impact. I am excited we hired our first regional organizer who's based upstate now. So we do have a full-time staff person, but obviously that's one person. And we are starting now to focus more of our federal advocacy efforts on these local city and county policies. So trying to think about how do we counteract what's coming down from the federal level on a local and city and county level. So I do think that moving forward, we will be putting many more resources into that upstate and to the west, but it is a struggle. There's just fewer immigrant serving organizations as well, and they're stretched so thin. And like I said, there's, many of them are refugee resettlement agencies, and so right now there's the constant fear that, they're going to be shutting their doors, much less trying to do advocacy or policy work. So all of those things combined make it just an incredibly difficult place to organize.
To what extent is the New York Office for New Americans kind of filling some of those gaps? I mean, they have a statewide reach.
I think they do fill certain gaps, especially when it comes to immigrants who are here with documents, who are trying to apply for citizenship or access services that they are eligible for. But I think in terms of the broader question of protecting immigrant communities, they're not as useful.
I will disagree a little bit. I think that office is absolutely useful. And we talked about tapping into these kind of resources that are non-traditional. These new Americans are our top resource. They're the people that have not only gone through that process as well, but also the people that now have the legal status to protect those undocumented students. So as we moved upstate in our efforts to organize the students, we're tapping in organizations like them, because they have access to non-traditional partners that have a legal status that can protect our students and protect undocumented community. But also because they're the most situated in terms of knowing their districts. They have data of how many immigrants are out there. They have space for us to hold meetings. And so as we moved on to do organizing upstate, we're not only looking at a one-person team, we're looking at teaching the people that actually live there how to organize themselves. Jackie Beam was in the room. If she remembers a while ago, she came and asked me questions about how I started organizing. And I think my highlight of that conversation was, I got so excited when Governor Cuomo followed CUNY Dreamers on our Twitter account. It wasn't necessarily that he followed us, but that he was paying attention. Whoever in his office gave that follow was looking at our account. But also how I started not knowing all these other issues. So when we talk about the immigrant movement, I talked about just the group of people that I knew, undocumented immigrants. And then I found out that there is this entire other group that, came here with TPS, which is right now another huge issue at the national level. Or immigrants who came here and their spouse visas or student visas and their relations and all this immigrant movement, and how do you bring them together when their experiences are completely different? So as we move to upstate, our goal is to really teach the people that are interested in there to learn how to organize themselves. And for us, organizing doesn't necessarily mean just going after the state or their local elected officials and how to do, pass policies that will help us, but just having a panel where they learn about what's happening at the national level, at the state level, having a conversation about what it means to be an undocumented person at a SUNY school, what it means to be an undocumented person living in a district that is not necessarily pro-immigrants. So that's our goal, really just going and tapping into this already people that care about the issue and the resources that are currently in upstate that I believe that we haven't taken advantage of yet.
Professor Nye had a question.
Hi, thanks to all of you for your comments and for the great work that you're doing. My question's for Ross. I was really interested in the sanctuary space sign that you held up and the work you're doing with businesses. And I would think that on the one hand, small businesses in New York would be in favor of this because they employ immigrants, many of them, or immigrants are their customers. On the other hand, I could imagine them not wanting to stick their neck out, right, publicly. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this work that you're doing and what you're encountering when you talk to these people. It's a tremendous effort. Because, I mean, what keeps me up at night is what are we going to do when they come with the trucks and the dogs, right?
Right.
And so this is important, what you're doing, and I'd just like to know more about the experience of
And can I add on to
working
that,
with
because I
people
know
in the
there's,
community.
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, but yeah, there's also, I've heard of sanctuary restaurants, right? Is that part of this, or is that a separate
No,
separate
sanctuary hood
development?
can be a restaurant, it can be a dry cleaners, it can be a bodega, it can be anything. And so what we're doing is we have volunteers who are going and that we train in our spaces to go into these neighborhoods where there's a high population of immigrants and undocumented. And we basically knock on their doors and we say, we explain who we are and ask them would they be interested in becoming a sanctuary space or a safe space or a sanctuary respite. And many, as you say, many of them do have undocumented people who work for them. And so they never know if there's going to be a raid. And so many of them are receptive to become a sanctuary hood space, a safe space, and some of them are not. So we can't force it on anyone, but certainly we can make the appeal if they're interested in becoming that. And some of them do. I was at... I had to speak for the Quakers at the Quaker House in Brooklyn Saturday, and there were people there, and they agreed that they wanted to be a sanctuary respite, a sanctuary place. They want the signs. They want to have this in the windows that people. And the other part of this is educating our immigrants and our undocumented that if you see this sign, it is a space, a safe space that you can go in if there is a sweep. And getting this word out, and it's beginning to spread. It's a process. Yeah. Yes. Oh.
We have a few more minutes, so maybe those are the last two questions. You stand between us and the wine and cheese reception, so.
No pressure at all. Hi, I'm Tiffany Joseph, and I'm a faculty member out at SUNY Stony Brook. And one of the questions that I had as you all were talking about the municipal New York City ID is New York State's plans to, in terms of the enforcement of the Real ID Act at the federal level. So for people unfamiliar with it, this is an act that was passed by Congress after September 11 to basically standardize driver's licenses that are issued around the country. Only a few states, I believe maybe 8 or so, have said that they would make it so that in their states, if you are undocumented, you're able to get an ID under the Real ID Act. And I was just curious if you all know of whether or not New York is making efforts as a state to try to make a similar shift in terms of the enforcement of the Real ID Act. And I feel like that would be a way that, in terms of beyond the municipal New York City ID, that you can travel or get on the plane or go into a federal building with that state issue ID. So I was just curious if anyone might know.
I don't know whether New York has it, but New Jersey does. New Jersey does. Yes, you can go to motor vehicles in New Jersey and get such a document. Even if it's not a driver's license, you don't want to have a driver's license. You're not taking the driver's test. You're not none of that. But you are issued. Yes, in fact, a friend of mine just went last week. Yeah.
So we have a campaign that we're running right now in coalition with a number of other organizations across the state called Greenlight New York. So New York does not offer driver's licenses or state IDs to non-citizens or undocumented folks, I should say, people without papers. So I think the first step before we get to even Real ID compliance and undocumented folks being able to get a Real ID compliant ID is to pass that through the state legislature. And we have a bill that's been introduced. And as you said, New York would in no way be leading the way. Many other states, including big states like California and Republican states like New Mexico, have driver's licenses and IDs for undocumented individuals. And yet somehow it has never gotten across the finish line here in New York. So that's definitely a campaign that we're working very hard on. In fact, last week we had an in-district lobby visit day. We did 25 lobby visits. So, we're trying to get there, but it's an uphill battle here in New York.
And I'm just going to add that that's something that we're definitely supporting as well, not only because it will allow undocumented people to have an ID, but also because a lot of our undocumented students are into the science field and they have a lot of research conferences to go, and it's really hard for them to travel. I mean, I myself had to travel to California this year only 3 times, and I spent 4 days on my way there and 4 days on my way back. So totally going for that.
And one other thing I'd say in terms of talking about upstate, so many of the interactions that happen between undocumented immigrants and Border Patrol happen because they're pulled over and they don't have a license. And so being able to apply for a license and have one really could act as a lot of protection from those kind of interactions.
And just throwing an idea out there, if anybody's an engineer or if anybody's looking to do anything for the movement, create an app to help those mothers or sons or people that are undocumented upstate that are, in need of a right to go somewhere because they don't have a driver's license, but they have a car, let's say. Please create something like that so then people can have access to that and prevent those times of, them facing deportation because they were driving without a license.
I'll give the final question to Dinny, and then after this, there's the reception, so feel free to continue to ask your questions. Are you guys going to stick around a little bit?
My question is very brief because actually it got superseded by the earlier comments. I've been sort of involved in the Green Light, the driver's license campaign. There are, by the way, 11 states, including Connecticut, our neighbor, that have driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants. But what I wanted to get your views on is that my sense in the involvement that I've had on Long Island with the Green Light campaign is that it is a campaign only with very few allies, only with immigrants. I went to Albany. We were 40 people in a bus. There were only 2 or 3 of us who were not Hispanic immigrants. And I thought, this cannot work unless there's a real alliance. And I don't know, maybe it's happening upstate, but it certainly is not happening on Long Island. So I just wondered what you thought.
I think that's a great point, and I know that our organizers are working hard, especially to get local law enforcement to sign on to the campaign and to be some of the biggest proponents. And that's definitely a tactic that we've been pursuing, but I agree.
And New Sanctuary also was reaching out to faith-based institutions in Long Island. In fact, we have something coming up planned that we're going to be going out to talk. I'm going to talk to them. We have a number of churches who are interested, and they're going to bring the community in to their plate, to their spaces, and so they will do that. Also, let me say that next, anyone who's interested in being trained to be a part of the accompaniment program, next Thursday in this very space, we're having a training at 6:30 on the 17th of May. So anyone who's interested in learning about how to accompany, being a part of that, 6:30. Is it 6:30? It's Wednesday. Wednesday, the 17th. Yeah. The 17th, Wednesday. Yes.
And we'll be on this floor in one of these rooms. Exactly 3 rooms.
So I'll give the final word to Monica.
I was going to say, where's the tech person? I kind of want to share a video with you guys, but I think she will email it to all of you. Just to end, I think that all of you have a voice, all of you have an opportunity to lift somebody else, to advocate and find resources. So I will respectfully ask that all of you take at least 2 hours of your time and do some research online and find someone that you want to help that may need resources. There are a lot of places where you can donate if you want, but not necessarily. Attend an event. If you know someone who's undocumented, share information with them. Go with them. Sometimes that's what we need. Sometimes we don't mobilize because we don't have someone to go with, and we don't know whether the place where we're going is safe or not. Also, work in non-traditional places. Do not go to just immigrant events. Go to the event where they're talking about Planned Parenthood. Go to the event where they're talking about health insurance. Go to events that are non-traditional so you can meet non-traditional partners. And just stay positive. I mean, listen, I could be deported at any point, but I'm still happy because I know that I will do the right thing. And just to give a shout out to Ricardo, who's actually someone who has an absolutely different story to the one that I have. He worked at the hotel where Trump, launched his campaign. And what does that feel like when you are an undocumented person working for a person that's now wanting you to be deported? So please talk to him about that experience too. I'm sure he'll be happy to share. But do your work.
Say hi, Ricardo.
Yeah, say hi.
Baruch student, by the way. Anyway.
She's really trying to get us back to Baruch. All right, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.